Welcome to Confronting Injustice. I'm Linda Solomon and my co-host is James Watson. It is our pleasure to have two very committed, passionate, and steadfast activists and organizers with us this morning. Kevin Peterson and Cathy Hoffman.
We would like to start with each of you sharing a bit of your background.
Well, I'm happy to be on this show and look forward to having the conversation. My background stems from my interest in social justice in Boston. There's a deeper background that stems to family activism in Philadelphia. But the general interest is in engaging the communities around justice, racial justice, justice connected to democracy, justice connected to opportunities where communities can come together and develop leadership modules and leadership activity that strengthens the fabric of the community. Community building is, in essence, what I've been working around over the decades now, and that's been connected to building up civic participation. My organization, New Democracy Coalition, was founded in the early 2000s around the issues of civic literacy, civic policy, and electoral justice. We're proud to have been involved in redistricting over the years, registering thousands of voters, and now deeply engaged around the issue of racial repair in Boston.
Oh, wonderful.
So, Cathy Hoffman, I'm almost a lifetime Cambridge person. I'm old, I'm 70 now, and that's a factor about my own history around peace and justice, which is a little more than 5.5 decades of doing that work, and I feel really lucky to have come of age at issues around racial justice, around economic justice, about the burgeoning of the women's movement. Come of age just as movements crested so that I could both learn from them and then grow with them. Part of that history has been involved with a deep commitment to nonviolence and nonviolent civil disobedience as a foundational, transformational, radical approach to a country whose roots are founded on violence and inequality. And we don't need movements that replicate that, even if they have good politics to them. We need transformational politics and transformational movements that are really about a new freedom movements that have been led by Black people in this country who actually believe in democracy more than anyone else ever has. So that's part of why I'm where I got my start.
Wonderful. Both of you are to be commended for the work that you've done. I would like to have you speak a bit about the Faneuil Hall initiative. I was at Faneuil Hall recently and saw that, Kevin, you and two other ministers or clergy changed yourself to the Faneuil Hall, one of the entrances, and Catherine, you were there as well. Can you speak to us about that initiative and how you became involved with that?
Sure. The so-called Faneuil Hall project, we call Faneuil Hall Slave Traders Hall for the time being, is about changing the name of that building because it is connected to a legacy of slavery, which is a legacy of oppression. And we feel that overall, if we're going to renew democracy or foster democracy in greater ways, then we need to address the issue of racial disparity. So we seek to change the name of the place in order to engage in deeper conversations across the city of Boston about the legacy of racism in Boston. Peter Faneuil, after whom the hall is named, was a slave owner and a slave trader. He did nothing significant to support the idea of democracy. So we believe that the name of that building should not adorn the name. That building should not adorn the name of Peter Faneuil, who again contributed nothing significant to democracy in this city and in this nation. We believe that an appropriate name of that building would reflect someone who added to the idea of freedom, and that, quite frankly, respects the history and the legacy of Black people in the city. We use a fairly coarse analogy, but I think it's true that we should change the name because no one in the city of Boston would be okay with the name Hitler Hall in the city of Boston. Now that's a coarse analogy, but it's true. So we seek to articulate the name change as a way of addressing issues of systemic racism. So it's connected to a larger project, and I can come back to that a little later. But we need to focus on the structural disparities that exist between whites and blacks in the city, and this project, which comes out of the Charlottesville project in Virginia, around the removal of memorials, Confederate memorials in that city, and it comes from the New Orleans project in terms of removal of monuments in that city connected to slavery. We can talk about that a little more, but the name change project is vastly more complicated than the symbolic exchange of one name for another.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think part of it really raises a question about history too, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And how we make change. And someone recently said to me, we can't grieve and transform what we don't know, right? And this really isn't about changing history, it's about acknowledging our history. Because, as I was saying, you know, this country's deepest history is based in violence and conquest, right? We also have this history about the Constitution. People say, oh, let's pay attention to that. But isn't that other history over and done? It's like, no, it's not, because we haven't really looked at it. Turns out one of the people that Kevin and I have in common is our friend Howard Zinn, who's a man who wrote The People's History of the United States. And again, before that book got popularized and also banned in places because people don't want that history known, we never got the history of women. We didn't get the history of people of color in this country. We didn't get the history of Native people. We got the history of sort of the white winners, and that's enabled a certain narrative and consciousness to continue, right? So in order to transform a history of violence in this country, to transform a history of racism, we have to face it. Otherwise, it's just being transferred over and over, and here we are again with a kind of violence. And so I think, you know, people say you want to ruin our history. You're lying about our history. It's like, no, actually, we're really excited to be wanting to talk truthfully about our history, to tell the truth about our history, to say to people, this is a liberatory process. This changing the name of Faneuil Hall is about engaging people in liberation. We don't need to be tied to these stories celebrating people who are really not representative of the best of what we could become. Right. So
absolutely,
yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely.
And it's important to make concrete our history to what's existing currently. Mm-hmm. So when we highlight the fact that Peter Faneuil was a slave owner and that the Faneuil Hall Marketplace is sited on a former slave auction block, we're trying to make a connection into the present where we see so many disparities. The life expectancy of a black person in Boston is 10 years shorter than the life expectancy of a white person. There is a connection between the historic tragedies of the past with regard to race in Boston and what's happening now. The incarceration rate among black males in 2022 far exceeds incarceration rates among whites. We've heard the statistic from the Federal Reserve that says that the average net worth of a black family is about $8 compared to $247,000 for the average net worth of a white family in Boston in 2022. So we try to make these connections, and those connections are real. They're viable. It's not like we're fictionalizing it. The very fact that there are 140 businesses and shops at Faneuil Hall, where 20 million people come each year. None of those businesses or shops are owned by black people. Not one. As far as we could tell, 2022. There is no disassociation from the historical legacy of racism in the city and what's happening currently. So we raise the issue in order to educate ourselves and then move forward to the deeper discussions around racial repair and eventually racial reconciliation. We can't move to those places of structural policy changes around race if we in fact do not explore what the history has been and how we can have dialogue on a very civil level and then move forward towards healing.
Right. Okay, thank you.
How long have you been fighting to change the name of Faneuil Hall, and why is it important?
Yeah, we've been inspired by the Charlottesville movement. I mentioned that. That was an effort in 2017 to remove a Confederate statue from the public square, the center of Charlottesville. We were inspired by that. So what we're doing at Faneuil Hall is not unique to Boston or unique to me. I had the opportunity to be in Charlottesville when some of that organizing was happening. I'm connected with organizations in New Orleans where the mayor of that city worked with the community to bring down Confederate statues. That was 2017. Our movement has been in place for about 4 years, nearly 5 years. We've faced real resistance from our city fathers, so to speak, and now our city mothers, those who are in charge of helping move this conversation forward. For reasons we're not entirely clear, but we've been pushing the city council to hold hearings so that we can have a conversation around race and disparity as it's connected to the name change of this place known as Faneuil Hall. We call it Slave Traders Hall.
It's, you know, I agree with you completely that there's a backdrop to everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
That's right.
And, you know, in order for people to, I think, even think about engaging in looking at this false narrative can be difficult for some people, you know? It can be uncomfortable to think that what you thought was history is in fact not the case. So I'm led to ask, I know that you were talking with people at Faneuil Hall during how many hours were you with the three of you?
6 hours.
I think 6 hours we were chained to Slave Traders Hall.
Okay. And so you took the opportunity to talk to people in the audience, you and a few others. Can you share some of the responses?
You know, it was fascinating because there were a lot of different people coming for cruise ships and the fall foliage, and so it was a conversation starter. And I feel like, I mean, I talked to maybe 125 people over that 6-hour period. Some people who were just absolutely furious about this idea. You're trying to kill history. If you kill our history, you'll kill our future. And some people saying, 4 different people at one point saying, you know, we were really so much better. This is very divisive what you're doing.
Really?
You know, things were so much better until, well, there was a major setback with Obama as president. I was like, what? And what I began to understand when you hear 4 different people, someone from Kansas, someone from New Orleans, all saying sort of the same line of things, it's like we have a real problem in this country. We have a real problem with our history, but we have a real problem with the information that people are being given through the media about what is real and what is not real. And the sense that somehow President Obama is who's responsible for racial setbacks was like, whoa, but this is powerful. Like, where are people getting this? And what does it mean for us to engage differently? I mean, there are a number of people, some students who came, kids from schools who were like really interested. Right. And yet, for me, the ability, I mean, obviously I had a position, that's why I was there, to begin to be in dialogue with people who looked at things so differently. And it was like, do you think that we've really come very far? And, you know, people were like, for a number of white people, it's like, things are fine now. And so we live in a world with lots of different narratives.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it's an interesting thing. I think about it as a white person, you know, I said to people, you know, my ancestors came over on that Mayflower. So I'm descended from those people. And I feel like what was done in my name, that history of annihilation of native peoples, white people whose ancestry is rooted in slavery, they're like, that's a long time ago. It's like, it is a long time ago, but the conditioning still lives in us. Right. It still lives in us. We have not changed that mindset that talks about white superiority, right?
And when in history have we stopped to really reflect and
that's right.
take account of what's happened and then change? When?
Exactly. And I feel like, for me, honoring my ancestors is to do them one better. Is to do them one better. Some people call on their ancestors as sources of liberation for them, and that's one thing. One of my teachers says we as white people, or we as people, we can become the ancestors worth descending from, and that's about freeing ourselves from white supremacy. I mean, white supremacy, what it's done to black people and native people is like destroyed people's lives. But for us as white people, that sense that we're better than others, that like keeps us separated from our own humanity. It's like, no, I'm needing to learn about nonviolence. I'm needing to learn about interdependence. I'm needing to learn about the most radical possibility in this country, which is about beloved community. We're not talking about better than, anyone being better than. We're really talking about something beloved. And what a gift that would be. Absolutely. But we have to practice it, you know. We have to like practice it. So.
But before we can practice it, we have to acknowledge that the narratives that we hold true are not true. And we have to deal with that level of discomfort that brings.
Yeah, they're false narratives. As I've encountered white people in particular over the years, they had no idea, who Peter Faneuil was, but they have no conception, no reality about how slavery existed in Boston in particular. Right. They believe that that Boston was only the cradle of liberty from which sprung the Declaration of Independence. That's incorrect, but they believe that it is a site where only the democratic ideal sprung, when in fact the city is mired in a racist history, a history around white supremacy. The economic reality of Boston as being one of the most prominent places in the world today as a site of prosperity, a place of cultural enrichment, the mecca of medical care, the Athens educational of America, is grounded in slavery. All of the success that we would point to in terms of this being a great city is mired in a foundation where slaves were enforced to do the work of others and create the wealth of others. So we want to exhume that history and show that that is worth looking at if we're going to move forward in terms of creating the beloved community a better democracy.
Yeah. And if we were free of that history, if we'd really changed that history, that would be one thing. But as you said, in Boston, the average wealth for a white family is $225,000. For a black family, it's $7. So that legacy is still with us today. And how do we transform it? And I think we transform it doing the work that you're doing, building community. For me, I'm really interested in intergenerational community.
Yes.
So that we're not just talking about youth-led movements, but we as adults, we're not going to abandon young people. We're going to connect with them. Some of the work I know, co-host Linda, that you've been involved with in schools around transformative justice initiatives. We need to make new possibilities, and also that we work globally, we work intergenerationally.
Absolutely. And you know, for people, for people who may be hearing this for the first time, can you just speak, and both of you, peace and justice. Peace and justice is the foundation of everything. Right. But, you know, can you speak to, this is not about blaming anyone. History is what it is. The reality of history is what it is. And we need to know what our history is. Yeah. It's not about blaming anyone. It's
about corporate accountability. It's about us owning the history, as ugly as it is at some points in the history, owning that and dealing with that and reconciling to the fact that that history needs to be reflected in our lives into something better, right? There are marvelous aspects about the history of our country. You know, the idea of democracy was reconceptualized from the old Greek model, where there were slaves in Greece. There were slaves here, but there was something more intentional about how the so-called founding fathers thought about democracy, and it led to where we are. So things are a little better. I can think about it in my own lifetime. My father, born in Georgetown, South Carolina, couldn't drink a Coca-Cola because white people in that town wouldn't allow him to. Had to step off the sidewalk because white people told him that he must escape that form of apartheid and move to the north and live a better life. So we can think about democracy as having the capacity to change things. But if we don't think about our history and reconcile our history in order to use that history as a tool to move forward, to broaden the idea of freedom, to broaden the idea of democracy, then we are a disservice to ourselves. And as Linda was saying, black people have been the center of all democratic or democracy discussions in the history of this nation, and it's expanded the democratic idea across the globe, just in terms of our struggle. So what we're doing now with white allies who see things ways that we see them is exploring and grappling with that history so as to create the type of perspective that Martin Luther King did in the 60s, that the abolitionists did, Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and others. We're engaged in that process, and it's ongoing efforts and intentionality.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If you could share just some of your wisdom you have gained through your years of activism. Mm-hmm.
I'll let Linda go first. I'm sorry, Cathy, go first.
we have a short period of time now.
Just again, this word interdependence, intersectionality. Yes. We have so much to learn from movements as they're coming into being. I'm a 70-year-old white woman who's a lesbian. You know, when I came out, they were locking up gay people and taking our children away and lobotomizing us, and it was like that. And so that sense of doing our work from a framework of liberation, not just rights, but really liberation. And seeing what's possible and doing this work out of our own sense of loving ourselves and interdependence.
Wonderful.
And for me, as a minister, I go back to the scriptures. In the book of Leviticus, there is a phrase that talks about being a prisoner of hope, of being invested, being committed to the idea that there is always occasion for hope, for occasions for making things a little better, for coming out of certain types of confinements to certain types of freedom. So one of the things I've learned that I continue to learn and expand upon is that we must be hopeful about the work that we're doing and how we're in a situation where we can make things a little better. I don't lean too much on the cynicism and all the things that could distract us and separate us, but let's try to be hopeful and let's find the allies where we can and find whoever they are and move forward.
Right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both. If you'd like more information about New Democracy Coalition, or if you'd like more information about the Faneuil Hall Project,
You can go to the newdemocracycoalition.org website,
Wonderful.
the newdemocracycoalition.org.
wonderful. We thank you both for being here this morning and
Sharon, thank you.
sharing. Yeah. Very
It's been
much.
wonderful to be here.
Thank
And
you.
we barely talked about the wonderful work that Cathy has done over the years in terms of training us about
Oh my-
nonviolence. And
yes.
but she is, in my mind and my heart, a hero.
Yes.
A hero.
And
Thank
Well,
you.
if we can't build a nonviolent future if we don't learn about practicing nonviolence in the present, and that's also about being intersectional, where we don't put down this group or that group or whatever,
Ex-
but we really are
We
thinking
have to-
about a whole
exactly.
new thing and a whole new set of practices. We practice nonviolence because it requires practice. You don't just become
Agreed.
it. So.
Indeed.
And it involves a little bit of uncomfortability, if that is a term, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Right.
We want to live the fullest life that we can, and that means delving into things
That's
that
right.
may be a little uncomfortable.
Well, because the society we're living in right now makes me very uncomfortable. So it's not like, oh, it's very comfortable right now for everybody. No, it's not, no matter who we are. We're already uncomfortable.
And as
So the
long as we're
question is,
working through it.
how do we build towards something that really will invite
Absolutely.
something more beloved and transformational?
Wonderful.
And that's what Kevin is really embodying. So we've had, it's been a wonderful kind of partnership that we're evolving.
Absolutely.
And you must come back.
Yeah.
You must
Looking
come
forward
back.
to it. Looking forward to it.
Yes,
Thank you both.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.